Hello, everyone. Today I'd like to talk about the feminine and masculine in terms of creativity and production. One of the things that really bothered me about my WoW video, where I theorized about what could be wrong with the writing of WoW, is that I just don't think I defined clearly enough what I was talking about when it came to feminized and masculinized creativity. Because in this world right now, where everything seems and is very high stakes, it can be very easy to fall into a this is good, this is bad kind of binary thinking when it comes to masculinity and femininity. And this is very counterproductive because I believe both forms or perspectives on reality are incredibly necessary to create a very rich product, to create a story that is meaningful. So I would like to talk more about what I was actually referring to when I was talking about it in the WoW video. I was referring to it as a creative space or a headspace. And I just think I want to refine some of those ideas a bit further and explain where I was coming from when I was talking about it. Because once again, there might be some people out there who are thinking, oh, she's got internalized misogyny. She hates women. She doesn't want women in the workspace. Far be. That's the furthest thing from the truth. I want to be, creative. I am someone who has been writing for a long time. I've been someone who's been working with clients under a pseudonym. And I'm going to be frank, I chose a pseudonym that is neither male nor female. And if you were to read the reviews on my writing profile, you would see that many people don't know who or what I am. In some reviews, I'm referred to as she, and in some reviews, I'm referred to as he. And I consider this a compliment because it means that my work is moving beyond being one thing or another thing, and who I am is not being justified by me being a man or me being a woman. It's being taken at its face value, and I prefer my work to be seen that way. However, when we are tackling this issue about femininity and masculinity, it's very important to acknowledge that in many cases, when we're talking about this, we're speaking about generalities. And we have to understand that there are exceptions to the rules. There are outliers, there are special cases, okay? So you might be listening in and you might be thinking, wait a minute, this doesn't quite fit me. I don't quite get this. I recommend going back and listening to my videos on Jung, because basically what we're suggesting is that in general, for let's say 75% of the population, you're going to have men who have minimal anima, and you're going to have women with minimal animus. That means that they are strongly male or strongly female, or strongly masculine or strongly feminine. And there are exceptions to these rules. There are women with very, very enlarged animus who come off as being extremely tough. And there are going to be men who have enlarged anima who are going to come off as being extremely sensitive. And this kind of form of existence can actually shift in an individual. And so I really think that when we are talking about masculinity and femininity, this doesn't need to be an either or all the time for a single individual. It doesn't need to be limited to biological sex. It doesn't even need to be limited to a specific period of time, because you can change over time, and how you really consider yourself or how you may carry yourself in your life can also vary depending on the circumstances that are going on. However, it is very important to recognize that generalities exist for a reason. The reality is that society, for the most part, holds together because people are able to understand each other in some kind of general way. We have very general expectations of behavior, and all of this allows us to more or less function as a single unit. So while we must respect difference for what it is, we also need to respect generalities, because there are men and women out there who are feeling more and more like being a man or being a woman in the most basic classical sense of the term is somehow becoming a bad thing. And I want to push back against that kind of rhetoric and say it's okay to be a dude. It's okay to be a dudette, right? Like there's nothing wrong with being normal and following this general expectation that has been existing for quite some time throughout human history. There are some people who suggest that these generalities exist because of biological realities about our bodies, about, let's say, women having babies. This is just part of what defines a female's experience. So, moving from this spot, therefore, into the general subject I want to talk about, I'm going to first look at the feminine and masculine headspace. So I'm going to define that. And if you've seen my Jung videos, you already know what I'm going to be talking about. Now, we can talk about it in terms of anima and animus, or we can talk about it in terms of masculinity and femininity. So for femininity, this kind of general term is linked to being empathetic, nurturing. There is a focus on relatedness, on bonds, social bonding, passivity, and spirituality. On the other hand, masculinity mirrors what femininity offers. There's risk-taking, autonomy, aggression, logic and rationality, overactivity, and realism. So there, you could say in many ways that these are two sides of a singular coin that we could call human existence. And these headspaces represent, in general, specific perspectives that a person might have, or not even just a perspective, it is the lens through which they are going to view things and then behave. It's going to determine behavior and interests. And we actually see this now in long-term studies where, for example, in Northern Europe, where they've really broken down the barriers for women to be able to partake in whatever social activity that they would like to do, to work at whatever job they want to work at. What's happening in a society where freedom is king, your average woman is generally going to go towards something versus what your average man is going to go to. They are not the same. And so we need to respect these differences that do crop up in a lot of men and a lot of women. Now, once again, you might find yourself, kind of in an opposite sphere. You might be a woman with a very strong animus. So you're going to have more characteristics that are linked to masculinity and vice versa. However, in general, this headspace is going to determine your creative space and your creative content, because creativity is often an outflow of your personhood, of your identity, whether you like it or not. And to a certain degree, how you go about that creativity will also be determined by who you are as a person and your interests. And to suggest otherwise is really silly and actually detrimental to mental health. Because if you are a woman who really needs to feel the support of a community, sticking a woman into a room alone and expecting her to just perform is it's torturous, really. It's not good for her. And to take a man who is designed, shall we say, or formed, shall we say, to work alone and to not be bogged down with emotional or social expectations, and to shove him into a room packed with people, men and women, and expect that person to perform in a socially acceptable way and to be productive on top of that, that's also really unfair. And so I think it's very, very crucial for us to revisit what it actually means for men and women to work together and how we can tackle creativity through these lenses. Okay, so then let's get into the feminine versus masculine creative space. I'm going to call it the village versus the auteur. So the village is a group of people. They're working together, men and women. And the village raises the child, right? So we have this image of it takes a village to raise a child. And is this village created because the people within the village are helpless individuals who are stupid and don't know better? No. It's because they need that interactivity in order to feel whole and useful and good. And we need to stop, looking at people who are socially, I don't want to use the word needy, but they need social interactions in order to feel alive and to feel creative and inspired. We need to stop demonizing that, because that is a reality for a lot of people. And women in particular really like helping and supporting and working together with other people, men and women. Women like people. I mean, it's coming out now, like I said, in studies. I remember Jordan Peterson saying, women like people, men like things. And this kind of paradigm is absolutely true. If you look at societies where there is relative freedom for men and women to pick jobs that they want to work at, you're going to see women in nurturing roles like in medical fields and in education. They are literally dominating the educational system in Canada. And this means that a lot of children are not going to actually interact with a man until high school. And they're lucky if they get a male teacher in high school. Okay? And why is this? Well, there are many good and bad reasons why this kind of thing is happening. But one of the fundamental reasons is because women genuinely want to help people. They feel better when they're working with groups of people like them, and they want to work in that teamwork atmosphere. And as a result, if we look at women as gamers, we can notice very, very obviously that women are dominating the mobile market, where there are a lot of social games, surrounding fashion and beauty, and of course, casual games. And if we look at the workrooms of various creative industries, we notice that a lot of women are now trickling into these workrooms from the universities because there are more women actually graduating from university. And these women, over time, I believe, have been transforming the work paradigm in a lot of places, particularly in more liberal zones like California. And so now you have these writing rooms. And honestly, I imagine it to a certain degree to have the same kind of energy that I've seen on Tumblr, where you have basically people feeding into each other's ideas and finding inspiration from it. So the pros to, creating as a village is the feedback and inspiration and support that you will feel as a creator. But the cons do exist. And that is essentially the dilution of vision that can really happen. Then there could be power plays or cliques within the village. And of course, social and emotional manipulation can happen on an interpersonal level between creatives. And let's all be real here. Women can be extremely competitive in their own hierarchy. And this competition can result in bullying and other social nonsense, really. It's really terrible. I hate it, but there you go. All right, so then that's the village. What else do we got? Well, we have the auteur. Now, I want to be a bit careful about this because not all men who are auteurs work alone, okay? There are often what I would call the mentor student relationship between men. It's kind of like Kratos with his son out in the wilderness, this kind of father-son relationship. So the auteur is never 110% all on his own. He's going to pick partnerships that are very helpful, but in general, when it comes to sitting down and creating, they prefer to work on their own. And this is because men in general like to prove themselves. They like to take risks, and this often flourishes best when working alone. You're not going to be able to think deeper or think faster if you have, verbal junk or visual junk in the way. And that's just a reality. For men to achieve a flow state, they often need to have their own space. And the reality is that just like women wanting to work with people, men just enjoy working with things. So you stick them alone in a room with a bunch of code, you stick them alone in a room with a piece of machinery, and they're just happy. Just leave them there, right? And of course, this is going to influence not only how they approach their work, it's not only going to, make them want to compete with their fellow coworkers or to work on their own and have a literal physical cutoff space where they can just focus on their work and not have to get all of this input all the time. It also actually affects how they enjoy games. A lot of men enjoy competitive games and PvP games and other hardcore games that will push them or prove to themselves that they can achieve something, because men want to, at the end of the day, feel like they did something. Now, these classical auteurs, like I said, don't always work alone, but many of them will definitely ideate on their own. That is to say, they're not necessarily going to run around to a gajillion different people and say, is my idea good? They're going to usually go away with this idea that they have, and they're going to iterate on that, usually on their own or with a couple people that they really, really respect, and they might be looking for some specific feedback, but they're not going to be just saying yes to ideas because so-and-so said, oh, what about this or that? They're going to take everything with a grain of salt, because men in general, once again, are more risk-taking and they are more tough, and they're generally going to hold on to what they believe is the right thing for that project. So the pros for the auteur is that there is going to be a singular vision. There's usually room for innovation and creativity. And in general, it's going to be very on-task oriented, and there's going to be this focus on what do I see and how can I make that happen. On the other hand, there are some issues with this whole thing. So when you go off on your own and you're ideating on your own or you're working on your own, the problem is that it can result in a sense of pride or arrogance, and this can lead to not receiving feedback when necessary, or pursuing one thing at the cost of everything else, and therefore the whole entire project basically is one long mistake. This is just a shame, isn't it? That's just a lot of effort gone completely off the rails. And because they're alone, because they're not taking input from people, no one's dragging them back from the brink and saying, hey, this is a gimmick. Hey, this thing that you're clinging to and you need to have in your story really must go. And I'm just thinking about M. Night Shyamalan, who I really like. His movie, The Village, is probably my favorite, followed by Signs. I just love his stuff. But we all know that sometimes his movies don't work. And I genuinely think that there is sometimes a sense of him just going off and doing his own thing, and he needs a bit of a reality check from somebody. And the same thing with George Lucas, that's another one. And really, if we look at some of the greats in terms of filmmaking, like the Nolan brothers, or Denis Villeneuve, who has other creatives kind of coming in, we can obviously see that the most powerful cases of the auteur is when there is at least one other voice strongly speaking in and curbing their worst excesses. So we've looked at what it means to be generally masculine or feminine. And we've now looked at how this formulates these two ways of experiencing and viewing the world can literally create very specific creative spaces. Some are more teamwork oriented and some are more individual oriented. And of course, this is a spectrum. So I do believe that there are workspaces and creative spaces that could combine some elements of both in a very powerful way. And this will affect, of course, the creative content. The feminized or masculinized content that can come out of a creative can be defined by where they're coming from, what they're aiming for, and how they went about it. So it's very easy to point at rom-coms or dramas and view them as expressions of feminine interests and feminine creativity. And if you look at a lit RPG, I don't know if anyone here is familiar with that term, but it's a very interesting genre, shall I say. Yeah. Anyway, so if you look at a lit RPG or a very hard sci-fi or fantasy, you come away feeling like it's very much locked onto what is going to interest the masculine brain. However, sometimes the content that comes out from a specific creative space or a specific headspace is not appropriate for the IP. And that's, I think, where Rings of Power is having some issues, because the headspace for Rings of Power was clearly very sitcom-y almost. There was this drama element with how the characters talked to each other. It just felt very, very mundane. Yeah. So not only do I think Rings of Power represents a clash of modern versus mythological storytelling, but there is also an unfortunate mixture of feminine and masculine creativity that came out of it in not a good way. The Lord of the Rings original films, in my opinion, being created from Peter Jackson, his wife, Fran Walsh, and their friend, Philippa Boyan, the Trinity, as they're often referred to. Obviously, something was going on there with that group where they had just amazing kismet, and they were able to put out something that is very, very masculine in terms of content, in terms of energy. The energy of it is very masculine. But there are moments in it that are extremely sensitive and spiritual, which is indicative of a feminine headspace, a feminine creative space, and feminine content. And honestly, that's where it comes down to, is that the best kind of content feeds off of both the feminine and masculine creative space, the masculine and feminine headspace, and this content will blend both together. And the characters will therefore be fully formed individuals. They will be given time to breathe and just be themselves. There will be proper character progression, and there will be psychological truth and exploration within the characters. Not in a, goopy, wooby kind of way, but in a very strong but empathetic way. And at the same time, these extremely powerful stories with these very strong characters that we can connect to and we're invited to explore and experience with them, these strong stories will also have very solid foundations with good lore and world building in the backdrop. Things are going to make sense. There's going to be logic. There's going to be rational reasons for why people are behaving the way they're behaving. Now, once again, a character can be irrational because they're crazy or whatever, or because their characteristics are irrational. But within the greater scheme of things, things will make sense. Things will not be contrived. Things won't happen just because this character needs to look cool. Things will make sense even if the story is told in a non-linear fashion. And so this is where I think we need to really return back to a place where we have this village that we can draw from, these talented writers, male and female, who have been trained to work in writing rooms, etc., who have been, raised in Tumblr type atmospheres. And these individuals also need to be working with other writers. But at the same time, there has to be someone in charge leading the entire group as an auteur. And this singular vision must be impelling enough that everyone below, out of a sense of pride and professionalism, carry the yoke of creativity forward. Even if it's not 100% their idea, they're not 100% on board, they're not 100% invested, but they're going to be there to make that dream come true for the good of the company, for the good of themselves and their own job. I think when it comes to gaming, a studio that spends proper amounts of time to craft a good story to accompany its gameplay is accessing both sides of this feminine and masculine spectrum. This means that the game will be more than just pumping, big dick numbers, right? It's going to provide gamers a chance to introspect, to experience, and to analyze. In other words, to access their feminine headspace, their anima. And these studios that have a mixture of this masculine and feminine creative space will allow for people to come alongside and kind of put in their ideas and make this very inspiring mixing pot of concepts. But there has to be a level of professionalism and humility in the face of whoever it is that is supposed to be running it. And this is where I think I'm a little bit worried, because I feel like what we're looking at is a swing too hard into the village, and we aren't having enough people with the balls, or they're simply being hampered by bureaucracy, or they are being shut out because they're not team oriented or whatever. These auteurs with singular visions are being locked out of the industry. They're problematic, they're too risky, so on and so forth. And as a result, we're just getting a lot of projects coming out that are literally nothing, really. There's nothing there, right? So think about like Skull and Bones. Think about Anthem. Think about what WoW has been kind of dragging itself out of. Now, with someone like Chris Metzen, we might be able to see something very solid, and we might be able to see a direction. But the reality is that democracy or democratic approaches to creativity, while being very empowering for the individuals involved, can also result in something that is formless and shapeless and without vision. It can lead to development hell. And it is worsened, of course, by corporate interests and by people who are literally there just to make money. Ultimately, I think the corporate people in charge are largely to blame, of course. They're going to be hiring people who are just yes men and yes women. They want the villages because the villages are literally just going to become, mindless drones for, the overlord. Auteurs, on the other hand, are the bulwarks. They are the bulwarks who step forward and say, I believe in myself and I believe in my team, who have subsumed their personal interests for this greater good that we're going to make together. When I look at Final Fantasy XIV and see how CBU3 appears to be operating, we have big names, right? We have Soken, we have Ishikawa, we have Yoshi P, we have Koji. But I'm also very much aware that they are not the only people involved in this, right? Ishikawa has a room full of writers underneath her who are doing work, good work. Koji has other translators who are working in various languages beyond just the English, who are doing great work, I'm sure. And Soken himself, I don't know if anyone took the time to watch this one where they had parts of the music production team trying to listen to clips and sound effects to see what was what. And I was just blown away by the fact that so many of my favorite tracks were actually composed not by Soken, but were orchestrated. Well, maybe they were composed by Soken, but they were largely orchestrated or compiled or whatever by someone else entirely. And this is where I'm saying, yes, we have these people at the front of the head who are going to get a lot of mention, who are going to get a lot of praise. But behind these singular visionaries, there are villages of people that we need to give them a shout out because they are subsuming their own interests in, for the good of Final Fantasy XIV. And that takes a lot. That takes a lot. Because in this day and age, where you have a lot of people running around being like, my aesthetic, where we're having a lot of American companies struggling with figuring out where their game is going, what direction is this going in. A lot of people are like, well, the publishing companies and the corporate people, like, they're just jerking everyone's chain. And that is indeed true. That does appear to be a significant factor in this situation. But at the same point in time, there is also another issue going on, which is that there aren't even necessarily people strong enough or brave enough or risk-taking enough to like step into the gap and be like, hey, I'm going to take this on. Now, maybe they do exist and they've just been told to shut up. And that brings me back to my previous point that there does seem to be this weird thing going on in the West, particularly, where we have this overweening attachment to this democratic creativity. And there's a lot of people running around talking about passion. And while I agree passion is important, what I do think is harmful about that rhetoric is that it takes away another important part of being a creative in an industry, and that is professionalism. And so if you are someone who has harnessed their abilities to work with a team for something, maybe it's time to have more structured, better managed groups of people, creative groups that are being led by one person at the front. And honestly, I'm just thinking in my head, this image is coming in my mind of Theoden on the hill. They're looking over the plain of Pelennor. And he's giving his speech, right? And he's screaming death and he's clashing his sword against everyone. And then what does he do? He leads the charge and everyone follows with him. And I think that's really what the perfect expression of masculine and feminine energies is. You see, if we separate the feminine from the masculine, or the masculine from the feminine, we become weaker. But if we harness our energies together and we follow a singular vision and submit ourselves to that singular vision, I think great things can happen. Just like great things happened on the plains of Pelennor. And yeah, it's just something that I've been thinking about a lot because as I started doing the videos on Jung, I kept thinking back to that WoW video where there were a lot of people going, well, we don't mind having, emotions in our stories. My answer is yes. Most people are very open to experiencing something on an emotional level. But if it's done poorly, or if it's done out of disrespect, or if it's done out of misunderstanding of what the IP or genre expectations are for that particular creative project, then we got a problem. If it's coming from a misaligned creative space or a stifled creative space, if it's coming from a misunderstanding of what men want versus what women want, then you're going to have issues. And I'm interested in sussing out what those might be. My theories might not be correct, but I still stand by my concepts that I was thinking about the theories with. I view these concepts as being very fundamental to understanding yourself as a creative, understanding the world, and understanding who you're attempting to target when you are writing for an audience. Because you cannot just come in and have long dialogue and exposition with people just sitting around navel gazing and expect your hardcore fantasy male audience to be there for it, right? You're going to lose them. There's just ways to write certain things and ways to not write certain things depending on who you're targeting. And this has been true for ages now, right? Like even the most want to be woke companies know that if they're going to make money off of women, they can't have beta men being the male interest, the main male interest in their romance story. That's just not the way it's going to work. So anyway, I'm just going to leave it there for today. Encourage everyone to think about themselves first and ask themselves, where is my head at? And then ask themselves, what creative space do I need in order to flourish? And then from there, I think you will better understand what creative content you are currently empowered to make. Anyhow, I look forward to hearing everyone's feedback on this little chat, and I look forward to seeing everyone whenever I stream next. And I'm just very excited to see what everyone's thinking, and I'll see you all next time. Take care.